Resentment wraps around you with its serpentine slither, constricting your every breath. Tokyo pulses with ambition, neon, noise, motion. Trains rush past glass towers. Screens flicker with endless opportunity. But inside your small apartment, the silence swells, filling the empty spaces with resentment too thick to swallow. A week ago, your passport laid on a kitchen table beside a signed contract and a one-way ticket to London. Your escape, your dream. Then came the call. The key words, terminal, 1 year, maybe less. You threw the contract and the ticket in the kitchen bin. You told yourself it was the right thing. You told yourself family came first, that you'd find another chance later. But late at night, when the city sleeps and the guilt rises, you wonder if sacrifice counts when it's laced with resentment. Your mum's in the next room now, sleeping, breathing slower than before. You watch over her, cook her meals, drive her to appointments. You smile, you nod, you stay strong. But deep down, something else has started to grow. A quiet bitterness blooming in the cracks where hope used to live. You resent this. You resent the cancer, the timing, the way her illness swallowed your future without asking. And worse, you resent her, just enough to hate yourself for it. So what does that make you? An ungrateful son? A disappointment? Or just someone who's quietly drowning in shame? You were always the dutiful son, raised in a small Tokyo apartment by a mother who wore sacrifice like a second skin. You learned early on what it meant to be responsible. Your father's death was a black hole you never quite filled, but your mother, she made sure the emptiness didn't swallow you. She worked 2 jobs to ensure you had the essentials. In return, you studied harder than anyone, not because she asked you to, but because you thought that maybe success could pay her back. But now that success is knocking, you're the one slamming the door shut. When the offer came, it felt like the universe was finally answering all your quiet prayers. A financial firm in London, triple your current salary, a fast track to leadership, and a life beyond Tokyo's worn routines. You could almost feel the cold British air on your face, hear the clinking of glasses in after-work rooftop bars, see the skyline from a different continent. You told your mother the news over miso soup. She smiled, but it was thin. Then came the hospital call. Then the biopsy. Then the word, terminal. 1 year, if you're lucky. You call the company back to tell them that you'd need some time due to a personal matter. The company was stunned due to your eagerness in the interview stages, but understood your decision. Your small group of friends were speechless, some understanding, some professing you should live your life. And now, you sit here, still in Tokyo, still in your apartment, watching your mother sleep on the couch where she used to read to you. You feel the resentment coiling in your gut like a snake, hissing questions you're too ashamed to ask. Why her? Why now? And God help you, why me? Before the diagnosis, your life was tightly wound and meticulously planned. Your apartment, only a 15-minute walk from your family home, meant you always stayed close to your mother. You wake up at 5:30, run 5K, shower, breakfast, suit, train, office, numbers, lunch at your desk, more numbers, train, home, repeat. You were the guy who chased time, who beat deadlines like drums, who saw promotions not as milestones, but stepping stones. You had goals, CFO by 50, your own place in Roppongi Hills. You didn't just want to succeed, you needed to, because success, in your mind, was survival. Though your mother did the best she could and you never wanted for the essentials, your ambition to succeed was a way to ensure you'd never end up like your mother, working herself to the bone with nothing to show but quiet pride and aching joints. She used to tease you about your obsession with planning. Even your dreams come with spreadsheets, she'd laugh, folding laundry. You'd grin, but never deny it. Planning kept you sane. It gave your life structure. It gave it meaning. Love, relationships, spontaneity, those are luxuries for people who could afford to lose. You couldn't. Not after watching your mother stretch every yen to make ends meet. Not after feeling the silent weight of being her only child, her only anchor. You believed that if you just worked hard enough, fast enough, you could outrun that weight. Your mother had been an elementary school teacher for over 25 years. She taught third-grade children who barely noticed her tired eyes or the way her knees ached after every recess. But teaching never paid enough, not on its own. On weekends, she'd walk to a small local restaurant where she waitressed day shifts, sometimes stretching into the early evening. You used to sit in the back room of the kitchen doing homework, your textbooks spread across the makeshift table that Makoto, the head chef, set up for you, while the clatter of dishes echoed behind the curtain. Sometimes, when you couldn't sleep, you'd see her hunched over the kitchen sink at home, hands raw from scrubbing, and you'd swear you'd never let her work again once you made it. Yet, even in those well-planned days, there were cracks, moments where you'd visit her at home and catch her rubbing her shoulder, or sitting in the dark longer than usual. You chalk it up to age, fatigue, stress. You didn't ask questions. Part of you didn't want the answers, because deep down, you feared the truth, that one day the balance would tip, that you'd be forced to choose between the life you built and the life that built you. One day, a small, sharp buzz on your phone alerted you during a client meeting. The hospital. Your mother. Urgent. You excuse yourself with a practiced smile, but by the time you reached the elevator, your hands were shaking. At the hospital, the doctor spoke in low, neutral tones, as if soft words could blunt the blow. Stage 4. Inoperable. A year. Maybe less. The world didn't crash. It stalled. Everything around you blurred like tears pressed behind your eyes, waiting for permission to fall. The only thing that remained in focus were your mother's eyes, calm, brave, like she'd been expecting this all along. Back at your mother's, she brewed tea like nothing had changed. You watched her hands, steady, practiced, pouring hot water over leaves, as if you weren't both sitting under a ticking clock. You wanted to scream. You wanted to rewind time. But instead, you sipped in silence, matching her stoicism like a dance you'd both learned long ago. Then she said, "If you go, I'll be fine." And just like that, she gave you the out, the release. But her voice cracked on the word, fine. And you knew she didn't mean it. Her illness casted a shadow in your apartment, making it feel somewhat unfamiliar. You paced the floor for hours, unable to sit, unable to rest. You retrieved the offer letter and the ticket from the bin and placed them once again on the kitchen table. They stare at you like an open door presenting two possible options. You look away and move to the window, watching the twinkling night sky. In your solitude of silence, you saw two futures, one with freedom and ambition, the other with obligation and heartbreak. The pain was so layered, it confused you. Was it shame? Guilt? Or was it resentment that your life had become a choice instead of a promise? Why did loving someone always seem to mean sacrificing yourself? You couldn't sleep that night. You go to the kitchen for a cold glass of water to ease your nerves. The offer letter glowed on a table. It was a light to a life which now seems out of reach. You read it again and again, trying to convince yourself it still mattered. But the resentment had started whispering, not toward her, not yet, but toward the universe, toward fate, toward this cruel timing. And in that, resentment grew louder. Why now? Why this year? Why couldn't she have gotten sick a year later, 5 years later, after you'd built your life? The offer sat unanswered. So did your heart. You tried to compartmentalize, go to work, stay productive, tell yourself you could do both, care for her, pursue your career, juggle time zones and chemo appointments like calendar entries. You researched private nurses, visiting care options, hospice schedules. You even considered speaking to an immigration advisor to see if she could come to London with you, as if a change of scenery could cheat death. You told yourself it was about logistics, but it wasn't. It was about control. You couldn't bear the thought of not choosing your own path. The resentment in this thought bloomed like wildfire in a locked room, consuming every corner of your mind. Your friends were no help. Some said, "You're doing the right thing," and patted you on the back with pitying eyes. Others hinted, "You don't owe anyone your life," their voices sharp with envy or freedom. You couldn't tell. You started to withdraw, not because you didn't need them, but because none of them understood. None of them had a mother who gave up her world just so she could help you build yours. And now that it was your turn, the weight of that unspoken debt pressed like increased gravity itself, pulling at your spine, your limbs, your every step forward. There were moments you almost called the company back, just to keep the door open, just to delay the finality. You'd type out emails and delete them, rehearse phone calls that you never made. You told yourself it wasn't the right time, but the truth was simpler. You were scared. Scared that choosing your dreams meant failing her. Scared that staying meant killing your own. You convinced yourself that staying didn't mean losing, that you could just delay your dreams a little. A year isn't forever, right? But inside, a darker thought grew louder. What if a year becomes 2? What if by then the window closes? What if you're too late? You're ashamed of these feelings. You smiled through conversations, nodded through work meetings, but every quiet moment was a war zone. You weren't just grieving your mother's illness, you were grieving the life you almost had. And in that grief, there was an internal shame at the building resentment. It happened in the most unexpected place, the clinic waiting room. While your mother was inside, undergoing a scan, You found yourself seated behind a man with a weary smile and kind eyes. He was older, maybe late 50s, holding a faded paperback and humming a tune you couldn't quite place. After a while, he turned round to you and said, "Your first time here?" You nodded. "My third year," he said softly. "My wife's inside. Cancer doesn't rush." His voice was calm, steady, like someone who'd already cried all the tears and made peace with the silence. You end up talking for nearly an hour about nothing and everything. His name was Mr. Sato. He used to work in international logistics, left a high-level position in Singapore when his wife fell ill. "At first," he said, "I thought I could do both, but my soul couldn't split in two. I chose her. Some days, I regret it, but not really." You didn't understand what he meant then, not fully, but it stuck with you. The way he didn't glorify sacrifice. He didn't pretend sainthood, just honesty, just choice. Later that evening, you sat in your mother's room while she dozed. The quiet buzz of the machines filled the space between your thoughts. Mr. Sato's words looped in your mind. You'd been searching for permission, someone to tell you what was right. But perhaps it was never about right or wrong. Maybe it was about choosing the kind of person you could live with being. Could you live with a success if it cost you the person who gave you everything? Could you live with the resentment if it meant being there when she needed you most? That night, you stood in front of the bathroom mirror and stared at your reflection for a long time. You looked older, more tired, but there was something else now, a quiet acceptance. The mentor wasn't just Mr. Sato, it was your mother's resilience. It was every late night shift she took, every bent finger from grading papers, every worn shoe she never replaced just so you could have new ones. The guidance wasn't always in words. Sometimes it was in the sacrifices we're too busy to see until we're forced to slow down. You called the company in London the next morning. Your voice was calm, polite, grateful. You turned the job down, explaining everything about your mother's illness and your need to be there for her. You tried to keep it professional, but your throat tightened at the end. They were kind, said you could reach out in the future. Still, once you hung up, you sat there frozen, phone in hand. It was done. No backup plan, no illusion of delay. The door was closed. That was the moment resentment truly hit you, like a cold wind against bare skin. It wasn't just about the job. It was about what it represented. Freedom, validation, everything you'd worked for since high school, when you were studying under flickering lights while your mother worked 2 jobs. You wanted that job to mean you made it, that the struggle was worth it. And now, by staying, you feared that you'd erase all of that. Was this what sacrifice felt like? A slow, steady burning under your ribs? Your mother gave everything for you, and this resentment consumes you because a part of you blames your mother's illness for stealing your future. A part of you hated that situation, hated life, hated how quiet your dreams had become. But then she called your name from the other room. Just one word, gentle, tired, and everything inside you shifted. You walked in to find her struggling with the remote, frowning at the screen. You sat beside her, showed her which button to press. She leaned on your shoulder and said, "You've always been good at explaining things. Something so simple, so human." And in that moment, the resentment dimmed. Just a little. Enough for you to breathe without guilt clawing your lungs. Crossing the threshold wasn't a grand event. It was 1,000 small ones. Cooking dinner together, picking up prescriptions, laughing at old photo albums, seeing the way her eyes lit up when you brought her fresh flowers from the park. This wasn't the life you planned, but it was real, tangible, and in its own quiet way, meaningful. Still, at night, when she was asleep and you were alone, the resentment lingered like a whisper. Was this enough? There were good days and bad ones. The good ones felt almost normal. You'd eat breakfast together, talk about old memories, maybe even go for a short walk if she had the strength. You learned to measure time in moments, not hours. You became her nurse, her chauffeur, her emotional anchor. But with each test result, each cough that lingered too long, the reality sank deeper. She was fading, and so were you. You started missing work deadlines. Your boss, once understanding, began sending curt emails. Your colleagues stopped inviting you to after-hours drinks. You didn't blame them. You were disappearing from your own life. Even your body started revolting. Tension, headaches, insomnia, and always, always that bitter root of resentment pulsing beneath your skin. Not at her, but at the life that forced you to choose between duty and desire. But you weren't completely alone. Mr. Sato became a quiet companion. You'd share coffee in the hospital courtyard, trading stories, or simply sitting in silence. Your mother's nurse, Keiko, a woman with sharp eyes and a softer heart, noticed your exhaustion and started leaving handwritten notes. "Remember to eat. You're doing well. It's okay to cry." You'd find them tucked next to the tea kettle or folded in your coat pocket. Small acts of kindness became your lifeline. Still, not all voices were kind. An old university friend messaged you. "You're wasting your prime years. She'd understand." You didn't respond, but the words burrowed deep. Was that true? Would your mother have understood? Or would she have carried the guilt to her grave? And you, could you live with that version of yourself? The one who walked away. Every kind act, every cruel comment became a test, not of your love, but of your identity. And you were still figuring out who you were becoming. The scan results came on a Wednesday. You had started to recognize the doctor's walk, slightly hesitant when the news was bad. He stepped into the room with a folder and a sigh, and before he even opened his mouth, you knew. "The cancer has progressed faster than we'd hoped," he said. Your mother's expression didn't change. She simply reached over and squeezed your hand, like she was the one comforting you. But your world fractured in that quiet moment. There was no more talk of treatment, just comfort and care. Just time. That night, you sat at the kitchen table alone, while she slept in the next room. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. You stared at an untouched bowl of rice, letting it go cold. For the first time since she got sick, you let yourself cry with no attempt to be strong. The resentment swelled again, not at her, not at the cancer, at yourself. You had done everything you could, and still, it wasn't enough. What was the point of sacrifice if you couldn't save her? Had you given up your dreams for nothing? You opened her old photo album, pages curling at the edges, filled with pictures of a younger you beside a younger her. Her graduation photo, her first teaching job, notes written in the margins in tidy hiragana. First day with Hiro, his first steps, our little apartment. You realized then that your entire life had been her dream. Not the job, not the money. You. She had built her life around raising you, and now you were doing the same. Had it always been this simple, and you've just complicated it? As you traced her handwriting with your finger, thought broke through the pain. Maybe the point was never to win. Maybe it was just to be present, to love fiercely in the time you're given. That night, you whispered into the darkness, "I'm still angry." But for the first time, you followed it with, "And that's okay." You didn't need to resolve it all. Not yet. But you were finally facing it. Not with denial, not with shame, but with honesty. And that was the beginning of healing. The fever came suddenly. One day, she was sipping tea in the garden. The next, she could barely keep her eyes open. You rushed her to the hospital, where the nurses moved quickly and gently. But you could tell by their soft voices and somber glances, this was different. The kind of different you don't come back from. You sat at her bedside as machines beeped steadily beside her, hands trembling as you fed her ice chips, trying to mask your panic with a smile. The days blurred together. You barely slept, only left her side when forced. Her breathing grew shallow, her words few. Once, in a brief moment of lucidity, she looked at you and whispered, "You're the best thing I've ever done." You wanted to argue, to tell her she did so much more, but all you could do was nod and press your forehead against her hand, letting the tears come freely now. This was grief before death. The anticipation, the ache, hollowed you out from the inside. You began questioning everything. Had you really been enough? Should you have done more? Did you hold back too many words, fearing they would make things too real? You replayed every moment, every argument, every laugh. There was no room for resentment anymore, only a deep, aching sorrow and a desperate desire to freeze time. But time was indifferent. It marched on, minute by minute, breath by breath, and you couldn't stop it. When her eyes finally closed for the last time, the silence that followed felt unbearable. The world outside kept moving. Cars drove by. Vending machines blinked in the hospital corridors. Someone laughed far down the hallway. And yet, Your world had stopped. You were alone, not just without her, but without the version of yourself that existed with her. You had crossed a line you could never uncross. The lowest point wasn't just losing her, it was a terrifying question that echoed after. Who am I now? The funeral was small, intimate. You kept it the way she would have wanted. No unnecessary formality, just a soft farewell. People came with stories about her, students she'd tutored after school, neighbors she'd helped, even when times were hard. Each tale painted a fuller picture of who she had been, not just your mother, but a quiet force in the lives of so many. You stood at the altar, clutching the folded eulogy in your hands, struggling to continue. Just as you thought you couldn't bear any more, you catch Makoto's eyes in the second row on the right. You hold his gaze, and slowly, as if in slow motion, he gently nods his head in a stoic manner that reads, "Go on. You can do this." You gather yourself and complete your heartfelt words. As you look around the room, you realized how vast her impact had been. Her legacy wasn't loud, but it was lasting. In the days that followed, you returned to her apartment to pack her things. It was in the small, quiet moments that the breakthrough arrived. Finding a drawer filled with every birthday card you made for her, an envelope of saved newspaper clippings about your work achievements, a tiny sticky note on her fridge that read, "Proud of Hiro, every day." You sat on the floor surrounded by her life, and for the first time, felt the weight of your own value. You had been enough, not because you stayed, but because you loved her fully. The resentment didn't vanish, but it transformed. What once felt like bitterness began to feel like depth. You now understood something people rarely admit. Sometimes, love and resentment coexist. Sometimes, choosing someone else means mourning the version of yourself that could have been. And that mourning is valid, but it doesn't negate the love. It proves it. You had resented the loss of your dream, but you had also chosen something real, something irreversible and meaningful. In the process of packing and reviewing these vignettes of your mother's life, something inside you stirred. She was gone, but not lost. You had carried her in your choices, in your care, in your sacrifice. And now, you would carry her forward, not as a burden, but as a guide. This was the reward, not the relief of pain, but the recognition of what it had taught you. That love, in its truest form, asks everything and offers something even greater in return. After the funeral, you returned to the office, but everything felt different. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed louder, your keyboard clacked emptily, and the financial reports in front of you no longer held meaning. Your manager offered condolences with a polite bow and left you alone. No one asked how you were, because here, grief is carried inward like a stone beneath the kimono, heavy but hidden. You responded in kind, you did your work, stayed late, and kept your voice calm. On the outside, you looked the same. Inside, you were unrecognizable. At home, you performed her Butsudan rituals every morning, lighting incense and offering her favorite tea. You whispered words you never said while she was alive. I'm sorry. Thank you. I miss you. The incense curled like a breath in the quiet air. These daily acts became your bridge to her. You couldn't speak to your colleagues about pain, but here, in front of the altar, you could speak to her. This was your way back, a slow, reverent return to yourself through ritual and remembrance. One weekend, you traveled to her hometown in the countryside. The air was crisper here, the silence heavier with memory. You visited her old school, still standing, and left a letter on the gate. Then, you sat by the river where she once played as a child, tracing her name in the dirt. The elderly woman at the inn remembered your mother and served you her favorite sweet, dorayaki. You ate it slowly, a lump in your throat, letting the taste take you back. These moments stitched you back together, piece by piece. You were no longer running from grief. You were walking with it. Returning to Tokyo, you made the decision. You didn't want to climb the corporate ladder anymore. You didn't want to chase validation in skyscrapers. Instead, you applied to work with a non-profit that supported terminally ill patients and their families. It didn't pay as well. It wasn't prestigious. But for the first time, you felt peace in the decision. You realized the version of you that stayed behind for your mother had also discovered who he truly was. And maybe that was the point all along. Months passed. Spring came to Tokyo, and with it, the cherry blossoms. You stood beneath the sakura trees in Ueno Park, watching petals fall like snow. It reminded you of visiting this park with your mother when you were small, her lifting you on her shoulders, your laughter echoing down stone paths. Now, you walked alone, hands in your pockets, head tilted upward. The resurrection didn't come with fanfare. It came quietly, like petals falling on a still pond. You were changing, not into someone new, but someone whole. Then, the old company called, the overseas branch. The job you once gave up was open again. This time, no conditions, a blank slate. You sat with the offer letter in your lap, staring at the salary. It was everything you used to want, everything you used to think would make you happy. But your hands didn't move to sign it, not immediately. You knew that accepting or declining would say nothing about your worth, but everything about your values. The test wasn't about opportunity, it was about clarity. Could you make this choice without regret? You returned to the but sedan that night, lit incense, offered tea, and asked out loud, "What would you want for me now?" You didn't hear her voice, but you felt her presence. In the stillness, in your chest, in the echo of her final words, "You're the best thing I've ever done." You weren't bound to the past, but it had shaped you. You weren't shackled by sacrifice, but it had deepened you. You closed your eyes, smiled softly, and made your decision. Not to chase, not to flee, but to live with intention. In the end, you wrote a letter, not to the company, but to your younger self, the boy who thought success was the destination. You told him about love, about loss, about resentment, and healing, and quiet strength. You told him it was okay to be angry, to grieve, to change your mind. You folded a letter and tucked it into your mother's favorite book on the shelf, a small ritual for a large truth. You had been transformed, not by escaping pain, but by walking through it. You began volunteering at the hospice center part-time, while continuing your new job with a non-profit. Every day, you met people on the edge of goodbye. Some had family, some had no one. You sat beside them, not to fix anything, but simply to be there, to listen, to hold silence with them the way no one had done for you in your darkest hour. You didn't need to offer advice, you offered presence. And presence, you learned, was its own kind of elixir. You started giving talks to caregivers, small community gatherings in tatami rooms and school halls. You told your story, not dramatically, but honestly. You spoke of your resentment, your regret, your revelation. You watched their faces shift, like something unnamed had finally been spoken aloud. After one session, an elderly man came to you with tears in his eyes and said, "I thought I was a bad son for feeling tired. You made me feel human again." That moment became a turning point. You realized your story didn't just belong to you anymore. It belonged to everyone carrying love and pain in the same breath. One day, a letter arrived in the mail from your mother's last student. Inside was a drawing of your mother teaching, a short note that read, "She made me believe I was smart. I owe everything to her." You framed it on your wall. Below it, you placed a picture of the two of you, your last family photo. You no longer need to prove your sacrifice had worth. You had lived it. And now, through you, she lived on in every heart you touched. And so, you continue, not perfectly, not without scars, but with peace. You return each day to the same city, the same life, but you are not the same man. You have brought back the elixir, the wisdom that love costs, but is always worth it. That resentment can be transformed, not erased, and that healing does not mean forgetting. It means remembering with grace. You bow your head once more before the book sedan and whisper, "Thank you for everything. I'm still becoming, but I'm okay." And this time, you mean it. In life, we all face struggles, but that does not mean we are alone in them. By learning to harness your own inner strength, you too can overcome self-doubt and triumph over adversity. If you've ever faced a similar battle, know that you are not alone. You are part of a shared journey. Feel free to share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help others feel seen and understand that there is always hope, even in the darkest of places. Don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay updated with the modern hero's journey. Thank you for listening.